They say some moments change nothing, and then there are those that split reality like lightning. This wasn't one of those normal days. Something was about to shift, and Ray Donovan, a man most forgot the moment he left the room, was at the center of it, eating a sandwich alone, again. No one remembered how many lunches Ray had eaten by himself. But on that particular afternoon, for reasons he couldn't explain, he chose a different seat back against the side office wall, eyes toward the old chain-link fence. Across the cracked street, a girl no older than 10 stood motionless. Her hands clutched her stomach, her small face smudged in gray dust, and her wide, unblinking eyes locked onto the sandwich in Ray's hands like a hunter tracking prey. For a moment, Ray just stared back. Then, without a word, he split the sandwich in two unevenly, handing her the bigger half through the fence. She took it gently, both hands trembling, and with a voice like paper tearing, she whispered, "I thank you," before dashing off, as if someone might chase her down and take it back. Ray barely had time to process her flight when a bellow exploded behind him. "What the hell are you doing?" It was Mr. Vickers, the site manager, a man whose voice could curdle milk. "Don't feed those rats. Next thing you know, we'll have a damn parade of them out here." A few workers snorted. Others pretended not to hear. Ray said nothing. He just looked down at the dry scrap of sandwich he kept for himself and chewed it slowly while the laughter fizzled into silence. No one joined him. They never did. Lunch ended. Dust returned to Ray's hands, sweat soaked through his shirt, and his eyes kept drifting to the spot where the girl had stood, long after she was gone. Silence was no stranger to Ray Donovan. He was raised on it in a home where speaking out earned bruises faster than answers. His father had taught him the difference between words and fists. Years of swallowing thoughts had left Ray with hands like bark, and a presence so quiet he disappeared in plain sight, just another laborer moving steel, breaking concrete. But today, something gnawed at him. The girl's eyes, wild, unreadable, left behind a spark he didn't know what to do with. "Donovan!" The voice snapped him out of it, the foreman, Bruno Keller, lumbering toward him, red-faced. "Section C's dragging behind. What's the excuse now?" Ray wiped his brow and pointed to a support joint, misaligned in the blueprint, something the engineers had clearly overlooked. Instead of recognition, Keller sneered. "We've got inspectors for that. You? Just carry your damn bricks." On the way back to his cramped rental above the tire shop, Ray stopped outside a dusty corner mart. He counted the coins in his pocket with slow fingers, then stepped inside. When he emerged, he carried 2 wrapped sandwiches, one for tonight, one for tomorrow, just in case. Have you ever seen someone punished for doing something kind? Ever felt that awkward guilt for being too good in a world that prefers indifference? If you believe a sandwich can mean something more, something that ripples out in ways no one expects, stay with us. What comes next might just rearrange the way you see kindness. That evening, Ray had barely kicked off his boots when his phone buzzed a number he didn't recognize. "Thank you for today. Someone wants to meet you." No name, no address, just that. He almost laughed it off until 20 minutes later, the front desk phone downstairs wouldn't stop ringing. The clerk's voice crackled through the speaker. "There's a red car blocking the entry. You know anything about it?" Ray stepped outside, heart ticking faster, and froze. A spotless, blood-red Mustang GT gleamed under the flickering lot light, parked squarely across the site entrance. A woman, maybe in her early 50s, climbed out. She wore an old military fatigue shirt, boots scuffed from years of use, her graying hair pulled into a no-nonsense bun. Her eyes swept the area like a trained scout. Beside her stood the girl from earlier, clean now, in fresh clothes. She stayed close to the woman, but her gaze remained locked on Ray, unchanged, unreadable. The woman stepped forward, offered a firm hand. "I'm retired Colonel Nadine Granger. This is my granddaughter, Leela. She's been under psychiatric care since we lost her mother." "She doesn't take food from anyone," the woman said flatly. "Not from neighbors, not even from therapists. But today, she ate your sandwich." Ray shifted, unsure what to do with that information. "I just didn't want her going hungry," he muttered, rubbing his neck. By sunset, the crew scattered, already laughing about weekend plans and payday drinks. No one called out to Ray. No one noticed him glance back toward the fence as he packed up, hoping, foolishly, that the girl might reappear. She didn't. Nadine nodded and reached into her coat, handing him a sealed envelope. "We don't repay compassion with cash," she said. "But tomorrow, I'll be back. I want to take you somewhere. Somewhere that values the kind of thing you did." Ray hesitated, then slowly took the envelope. He half expected money inside. Instead, it was a photo. The girl, younger, beaming beside a woman in military uniform. "That's my daughter," Nadine said, catching the confusion flicker in his eyes. "Lila hasn't spoken more than a sentence or two since the funeral. It's been 3 months." She paused. "Until today. She came home and told me about a man who gave her lunch without asking a single question." Ray looked from the photo to Lila, who now stood behind her grandmother, partially shielded but still watching him, that same silent, burning stare in her eyes. "I'm sorry," Ray said softly, unsure if it was enough. Nadine's face remained firm, but her voice eased. "Loss is part of the job. What breaks you isn't the service it's watching, what it does to the ones who get left behind." By then, a few curious workers had gathered, drawn by the sight of the gleaming car and the woman in military green. Whispers swirled. Then came the predictable storm mist. Vickers, red-faced and already angry. "What's this circus?" he barked, eyes narrowing when he saw Ray in the middle of it. Nadine turned slowly, taking in the manager with one assessing glance. "You must be the one who yelled near my granddaughter earlier." "I didn't yell at anyone," Vickers stammered. "Not directly. Loud enough for a grieving child to hear that her hunger was an inconvenience." Nadine cut in coldly. Vickers opened his mouth, but no words came. His shoulders dropped. "Look, we can't have people loitering. It's a safety risk." "Interesting," Nadine replied. "I'll keep that in mind, especially when I return tomorrow with the Veteran Outreach Program. I'm sure they'll be fascinated by your safety protocols." Then to Ray, 7 a.m., be ready. The Mustang's engine thundered like a dare as it rolled away, leaving dust and stunned silence in its wake. As soon as the car disappeared, Vickers spun on Ray. "What the hell did you do? Who are these people?" Ray simply shrugged. "Just someone who noticed what you didn't." That night, Ray couldn't sleep. His thoughts kept cycling Lila's hollow eyes, the photo of her mother, and Nadine's voice when she said, "Veteran Outreach Program," like it was both a door and a loaded gun. Something unfamiliar stirred inside him, not quite hope, but something adjacent. Its quieter cousin, curiosity. The next morning, while Ray was unloading tiles, the Mustang reappeared this time, flanked by 2 matte green military jeeps. The construction site ground to a halt. Phones came out. Hard hats turned. Nobody knew what was happening. Vickers came barreling out, furious. "We don't have military contracts. You need to move this circus somewhere else." Nadine didn't even glance at him. She walked straight to Ray and opened the car door. "Ready?" Ray blinked. "I think so." They drove out of the chaos, past city blocks and industrial silence, until they reached a building marked with the logo of the Veteran Reintegration Initiative. It didn't look like much, just glass doors and a faded flag, but inside, everything buzzed with quiet intent. Nadine explained as they walked. "This place helps wounded veterans. Also, children who've lost parents in service. But we're starting something new." She stopped and looked at Ray. "We need someone to supervise a labor-based recovery model. Gentle structure, soft skills, meaningful work. Not a drill sergeant, just someone who understands how to show up." Ray rubbed his palms together. "I'm not trained for anything like that. I've never taught. Hell, I barely talk to people." That's when Lila stepped forward, no longer hiding. She reached for Ray's hand and looked up, her voice soft but clear. "But you know how to share half your sandwich without being scared of losing yours." Silence spread like a ripple. Every staff member nearby froze. Nadine gave a single, slow nod. That was all it took. By the next morning, a formal approval arrived. The Department of Defense greenlit funding for Ray Donovan to receive 3 months of structured training. His new role would be hybrid, hands-on, supervisory, and entirely unlike anything he'd imagined. And that blurry clip, the one where Ray handed half his sandwich through the fence, it had started to circulate. Footage from a nearby store's security cam captured the moment a man handing half his sandwich through a fence to a dusty-faced child. The clip quietly made its way through internal military forums. Comments flooded in like a sudden storm. "We need more people like him. Real kindness doesn't need a uniform. Forget medals, this guy gets it. He wasn't military, but his quiet gesture spoke the same language as those who had served and sacrificed." Meanwhile, the construction company Ray Donovan had once worked for began receiving not-so-quiet backlash. Online threads popped up criticizing the manager's behavior. The site's reputation began to slip faster than they could patch it up. Reluctantly, the manager called Ray, offering to bring him back. He declined without hesitation. What Ray didn't know was that Nadine Granger hadn't just stumbled across him by coincidence. After Lila had returned home that day and described the man who shared his lunch, Nadine had tapped into local surveillance feeds from buildings across the street. She watched the footage frame by frame, saw Ray tear the sandwich in two, deliberately keeping the smaller half. That act, done with no witnesses, no fanfare, told her everything. She dug deeper, running a background check out of sheer curiosity. What surfaced surprised even her. Ray Donovan, 34, son of a Vietnam vet who had taken his own life when Ray was just 15. No criminal record, no social media, not even a digital shadow. Just a man who'd existed invisibly his whole life, and still chose kindness when no one was watching. At the Veterans Center, not everyone was sold on the idea of bringing in a civilian. The director had his doubts. "These people carry complex trauma," he said firmly. "They need professionals, not a construction worker." Nadine didn't argue. She simply played the sandwich footage again and said, "Show me someone better qualified. Someone who understands sacrifice without needing applause for it." The director gave in. Reluctantly, a trial period was approved. Ray's first day at the center was tense. The room felt thick with skepticism. Veterans with burn scars, missing limbs, and eyes that had seen too much gave him hard, unreadable stares. "This is Ray," Nadine introduced calmly. "He's here to help lead the woodworking program." "What unit?" someone barked from the back. "He's not military," Nadine answered, "but he speaks your language." A tall man with a prosthetic leg leaned forward, eyes narrowed. "What language is that exactly?" Nadine turned to Ray, giving him the floor. Ray stepped up, visibly uncomfortable, wiped his hands on his jeans and said, "The language of knowing when you've got just enough and still choosing to share it." That single line settled over the room like a silent agreement. No more questions. That afternoon, Ray didn't hand out orders. He didn't try to lead. He just grabbed tools and quietly began building a bench in the corner. When a young vet with shaky hands drifted near, Ray passed him a sanding block. No questions, no instructions. Just silent inclusion, an invitation to feel useful again. By the end of the week, 6 vets were showing up daily. By the end of the month, there was a wait list. The construction company called 3 separate times with better pay offers. The third time, Nadine answered the phone herself. "He's working on something more important now," she told them. "He's not building structures, he's building people." The Veterans Initiative Center quietly evolved under Ray Donovan's steady, word-light influence. While licensed therapists and clinical psychologists offered vital treatment, Ray brought something else, a space where a man's value wasn't determined by what he said or what degree hung on his wall, but by the weight he was willing to lift with his own hands. One chilly morning, a former Marine, one who hadn't spoken aloud in almost 3 years, shuffled in, placed a steaming cup of black coffee beside Ray's hand, and simply nodded. No words. Just a silent exchange between two people who understood that sometimes presence was worth more than sentences. Nadine watched from her office window as the workshop grew beyond wood. First came metalwork, then auto repair. One by one, the broken corners of the world found their way inside. The waiting list doubled. Success stories rippled out like sparks in dry grass. Have you ever seen kindness so genuine it almost cracked your heart open? If you have, type "soul-touched" in the comments, because those moments matter. A month later, Ray was officially named supervisor of the Labor Rehabilitation Group. He didn't give long speeches. But every day at lunch, he still split his meal in half just in case someone new showed up who needed to be seen. Lila, no longer the ghostly child from the street, began to smile more. She was gaining weight, drawing pictures, talking in full sentences. One afternoon, she handed Ray a crumpled sketch drawn with crayons, a sandwich, and beneath it, a red Mustang with smoke curls. In her uneven, wobbly handwriting, it read, "Thank you for being kind when no one looked." Ray didn't know what to say. He folded the drawing carefully and slid it into his breast pocket, the same one where he once kept his mother's birth certificate. He didn't need applause. He didn't need headlines. Just the quiet truth. On that one day, when no one was watching, he hadn't looked away. The Veterans Initiative Center quietly evolved under Ray Donovan's steady, word-light influence. While licensed therapists and clinical psychologists offered vital treatment, Ray brought something else, a space where a man's value wasn't determined by what he said or what degree hung on his wall, but by the weight he was willing to lift with his own hands. One chilly morning, a former Marine, one who hadn't spoken aloud in almost 3 years, shuffled in, placed a steaming cup of black coffee beside Ray's hand, and simply nodded. No words. Just a silent exchange between two people who understood that sometimes presence was worth more than sentences. Nadine watched from her office window as the workshop grew beyond wood. First came metalwork, then auto repair. One by one, the broken corners of the world found their way inside. The waiting list doubled. Success stories rippled out like sparks in dry grass. "What's your secret?" a suited government official asked Ray during a formal inspection, clipboard in hand and camera crew in tow. Ray shifted uncomfortably, rubbing the back of his neck. "No secret," he said finally. "They just need to remember they've still got something worth giving." The official scribbled down buzzwords: innovative therapeutic model, nonverbal communication pathway, civic reintegration strategy. All while missing the raw truth of what Ray had created: a space where broken people learn to make broken things whole again, including themselves. 6 months after Ray's first awkward day in the workshop, a letter arrived, this time stamped with the seal of the Department of Veterans Affairs. They wanted to replicate his model across the country. Funding, curriculum, certification, bureaucracy, wrapped in intention. At lunch, Nadine found him sitting in the shade, the unopened letter clutched in his hand. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. "You don't have to decide today," Nadine offered gently. Ray nodded, then quietly performed the ritual that had become his trademark. He split his sandwich in two, handed her the larger half, and kept the smaller for himself. She smiled, understanding the gesture beyond words. "They want to turn this into a program," Ray said finally. "Something complicated." "And you think what you've done is simple?" Nadine asked, arching an eyebrow. Ray didn't answer right away. His gaze drifted toward the open-air workshop, where veterans were laughing while building a heavy oak table together. Lila sat nearby, her tongue poking out in concentration as she sketched on a clipboard. "Not simple," Ray said at last. "Just human. You don't need a lot, but anyone can give away half of the little they have." Ray would never be mistaken for eloquent. Words weren't his weapon. But that day at the fence, when no one else saw and no one else cared, he made a choice that echoed louder than any speech. A girl found her trust again. A grieving grandmother found a reason to try. And a man who had spent most of his life unrecognized, unseen, became known not for what he built, but for what he gave away. The man who saved with a sandwich. So, if you've ever wondered whether small acts matter, if you've ever believed that the right thing doesn't need to be witnessed to change a life, this is your reason to keep doing it anyway. Because someone, somewhere, might be watching when it matters most. And if you believe that quiet kindness has power, that one sandwich, one moment, one shared silence can shift everything, subscribe to this channel. Here, we tell the stories most people never notice. QH Quiet Heroes. Incredible stories. Because some heroes never stop serving even when no one's clapping. "Don't feed those beggars." That's what the foreman had shouted when he saw Ray handing half his lunch through the fence to a dusty girl with hollow eyes. Ray said nothing. just bowed his head and went back to work. And that very night the construction site turned upside down, because a roaring red Mustang blocked the main entrance. Who drove it? And why? The answers were just getting started.